Hi everyone, I'm Justine from The Sacred Heart Homestead. I'm a wife and mother to 6 homesteading in Eastern Ontario, Canada. This week I'll be showing you 5 from scratch springtime breakfasts. I hope you stick around. With the days getting longer and the weather slowly starting to warm up, the chickens have been laying like crazy. So much so that the kids are getting sick of having eggs for breakfast. So I thought I'd make something a little bit different. This morning, I decided to make a baked oatmeal. To do this, the night before, I soaked 2 cups of oats in 2 cups of kefir. If you don't have any kefir on hand, you can always use plain yogurt. The next morning, I greased a 9x13-inch pan with some coconut oil. Afterwards, I put about 1/4 cup of coconut oil to melt in a pan. While the coconut oil was melting, I cut up about 1 cup of chopped roasted almonds. You could use any kind of nut here, like pecans would be super nice, or walnuts if you prefer those. Just make sure that you get the pieces pretty small so you're not hurting your teeth on a huge nut when you're biting into the baked oatmeal. To a large bowl, I added 2 eggs, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, a teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, a 1/2 cup of maple syrup, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, that coconut oil we had melted down, and all the oats that we had soaked overnight. I dumped in the almonds that I had cut up, and then I gave everything a pretty good stir. Once it was sufficiently mixed, I added about 2.5 cups of frozen blueberries. You could use any type of berry or fruit for this, and it can be fresh or frozen. With the blueberries, though, you have to be really careful if they're frozen not to mix it too much because you'll get the whole thing blue. So I just folded them in quickly. I took everything and I put it into that 9x13 pan that I had greased earlier, and then I smoothed it down as best as possible to make it evenly layered. I took that remaining 1/2 cup of blueberries and I just sprinkled them on the top just to make it look pretty. Once I was done with that, I sprinkled on 2 tablespoons of coconut palm sugar. The casserole then went into the oven at 375 for 45 minutes or until the top was about golden brown. While I was baking, I went for a run. You guys know I'm a huge fan of getting something in the oven for breakfast and then going to do something like a workout. And then when I was done my workout, this was ready to go. I took it out of the oven and I portioned it out for the kids, and we served it with some plain yogurt on the side, and then I just drizzled some maple syrup all over the top of that. The following morning, the kids had no choice. We were going to have eggs again. And I took out a pack of bacon. Now, I usually cure my own, but I didn't have any left. And so I just got a pack from the store. I just got some nitrate-free, no antibiotic stuff that they sell just at the regular grocery store. So I fried that up, and then I cut up a 1/2 red onion. While the bacon was cooking, I also had time to grate about a cup of cheese. To a large bowl, I added 12 eggs, and then I whisked it with about a cup of cream and a little bit of salt and pepper. For a really long time, I made some not so great frittatas, and then I figured out that the secret to a great frittata is the cream. You want to add the cream so the eggs get really fluffy. While I was doing that, some of the bacon finished up, and so I just took it out and I threw the red onions directly into the bacon fat, because yum, who doesn't like that? And I fried those up as well. Once the onions were fried up, I added some frozen mixed vegetables. Now you could use regular vegetables that aren't frozen or a different kind of vegetable blend. This is just what I had on hand and was already open, so this is what we chose. I added a little bit of salt to that, and I just got it to the point where it was hot. While waiting for the vegetables, I used my immersion blender. I've been using this a lot instead of using a whisk because it doesn't dirty really any extra equipment. It takes me just as long to wash it, and I find it does a better job at blending everything. Once the eggs were whisked, I added half the cheese, whisked it in. You're not going to want to use your immersion blender for this part because then the cheese will be all emulsified into the egg mixture. That's not what you want. Leave the cheese as is. Then I added the vegetable mix straight into that egg bowl, and I'll give it another whisk around just to make sure everything's distributed. I made sure my oven was preheated to 425, and then I took my cast iron skillet and I put it directly into the oven without anything in it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to preheat my cast iron pan so nothing sticks to it. This is the trick with cast iron. You have to make sure that the pan is super hot so that nothing sticks to it. While the pan was in the oven, just preheating, I had time to cut some of my bacon and put it directly into that egg vegetable mixture. I can't wait to have my own bacon again, but it's still sitting in the freezer right now, and I just haven't had a chance to get to it. But once I do, I am going to show you guys how to cure your own bacon because it's super simple, and then you can save money not buying it at the grocery store. You'll get so much more if you just buy a belly slab than if you buy the actual bacon. Once the pan came out of the oven, I poured in the egg mixture, topped it off with the rest of that cheese, and then I popped it into the oven for 25 to 30 minutes. You're going to want the top to be golden brown. Now, this was a little bit overdone, but it was still delicious. The next morning, it was blizzarding. Welcome to Canadian spring, where second winter comes around in April. Regardless, I decided that I was going to stick to my plan and make a springtime kind of breakfast. And so I chose to make a Dutch baby pancake, but I wanted to flavor it with some classic springtime flavors, and I chose lemon and strawberry. This breakfast was so good. The kids keep talking about it, so I can't wait to share with you guys the recipe. This recipe and all my other recipes, I'm going to go ahead and leave them in the description below so you can have them on hand. Basically what I did with this one is I added a half cup of butter to a cast iron skillet, and then I added 2 to 3 cups of frozen strawberries, and I cooked those until they were slightly mushy. While those were cooking up, I added 4 cups of sourdough discard to a bowl, and then I added 10 eggs, 2 tablespoons of maple syrup, half a teaspoon of salt, 1/3 of a cup of milk, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. And then earlier you guys saw that I had zested just one lemon into that bowl. And then I took my immersion blender and I mixed it all up until it was all nice and fluffy. I then took the cast iron skillet out of the oven, which had been preheating, and I added the sourdough discard mix right on top of that, and it kind of floated the berries up. And then I placed that whole thing into the oven at 425 for about 30 minutes. To serve, I just sprinkled the Dutch baby pancake with some icing sugar, and I poured some maple syrup on top. The next morning, we woke up to a wonderful surprise. The chicks had started hatching. We have 9 new little babies. It was an excellent hatch rate for us. We got 9 out of 11, so that's pretty good. And they are all doing so well. The chick hatching completely threw us off in the morning. Everyone was very distracted watching the little babies. And so the kids were happy just eating granola and yogurt for breakfast, and we opted to have like a bigger brunch. I had some sourdough bagels left over, and so I chose to use those. I've showed you guys my sourdough bagel recipe before, so I will link that in the description for you. And we decided to make a bacon bagel sandwich. So I fried up some home cured bacon. This is one of the packs that I magically found in my freezer that was hiding. And then I cut up some tomatoes, some avocado, and I made some homemade mayo to go on top. Making these types of sandwiches always reminds me of my grandparents. Growing up, my grandparents owned a fry shack that was like a restaurant where they had like fries and different kinds of sandwiches and cheeseburgers and stuff. And in summers, during my early adolescence, my mom would drive me there halfway, and then my grandpa would pick me up and he'd drive me to the restaurant where I'd work a full day. And so I would make club sandwiches and all this stuff. And I remember my grandpa just standing there at the counter cutting tomatoes for what seemed like forever, and he'd slice them so thinly and so perfectly. And then whenever it was my job to cut those tomatoes, he'd kind of just look over my shoulder and he wouldn't say anything, but I knew he was thinking like, oh, these could be better, these could be straighter, more perfect. And so it always kind of makes me laugh and brings back good memories whenever I make these kinds of sandwiches. Over here, I'm just finishing up some homemade mayo. I added an egg, 2 teaspoons of a lemon, some salt, and some avocado oil. Used my immersion blender to mix it all up, and it was ready to go. And then I sliced up those bagels that I had told you I had left over, and I started making sandwiches. Now, everyone wanted something a little bit different. Some wanted just avocado, some just tomatoes, some everything on top. And so I was a short order chef this morning, and I made what the kids wanted. By the end of the week, the snow had all melted and the temperatures were warming up again. So the chickens went back out and they started grazing. And I got to work making some muffins for breakfast. I wanted something fun for the kids since we were in the octave of Easter, which means we were still celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. I opted to make some sourdough, zucchini, chocolate chip muffins, I guess you would call them. And I got this recipe from Farmhouse on Boone. However, I did make a couple changes, so I wanted to let you guys know before I post that recipe in the description. I added 3 scoops of collagen to this recipe just for some added protein. Remember that if you're going to use collagen, make sure it's from a trusted source and that you know where it's coming from. I also chose to forget about the orange juice and the orange zest because I didn't want those flavors in my muffins. And I used kefir instead of buttermilk. And I added 1/3 of a cup to the mixture just to boost the amount of liquid in my recipe. And then also at the end, I used kamut or croissant instead of einkorn flour. I often make muffins for breakfast on either Fridays or Saturdays because we live about an hour and a half away from our church, and so we have to bring some food with us in the car, and muffins are quick, easy, and relatively non-messy in the car. So I like to have them made on a different day, and then I save them for the Sunday morning. I usually make 2 dozen, but lately it's looking like I might have to be making 3 dozen because the kids eat so much. In this recipe, you have to combine all the dry ingredients first and then all the wet ingredients in a separate bowl. And once you've done that, you mix them together, not too much because you're using baking powder in the recipe. And so if you overmix that, it activates it too quickly. And afterwards, you add the zucchini. I had some frozen in my freezer, about 3 cups of that, and I just folded it in so as to not disturb the mixture too much. And then I added the chocolate chips in the same way. Once I was done mixing it all together, I put it in a greased muffin tin and I baked it in the oven for about 25 minutes. I don't know if you guys can tell, but I am really messy when it comes to muffins. Actually, I'm pretty messy when it comes to cooking and baking. I kind of go through my kitchen like a tornado. I guess that's just my style. I've tried doing it different ways and I can't seem to stick to it. And so I just make a big mess and then I clean it up, and that's just the way it is in my kitchen. We opted to serve this with a big glass of raw milk just to boost the nutrient content. Again, that seems to be my go-to whenever I am serving something that I deem not as healthy as other things or not as filling as other things. I serve it with milk because that is a meal stretcher. The kids declared this to be one of the best muffins that they have ever tasted, so I think that will be on repeat for us. And that's all I have for you this week. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please go ahead and hit that like button. And if you're new here or you haven't done so already, please go ahead and subscribe. I'm here every Thursday with a new video. I'll see you all next week.